So welcome everybody. This is easy as 1, 2, 3, how and why to update your floodplain ordinance. And if you haven't been in any of my classes before, this is me. I'm Chuck Chase. I'm a certified floodplain manager. And I also have my master's degree with National Graduate School in Quality Systems Management. I've got a bachelor's of education and a bachelor in mathematics, both from Peru State College. Go Bobcats. And I am the outreach coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources. And joining me today is Elijah Kaufman. We're excited to have Elijah on board. Elijah's been working heavily with communities that are adopting new ordinances, communities that are joining the National Flood Insurance Program. He's a natural resource specialist too with our department. He also is a certified floodplain manager, got certified this year. Good job, Elijah. That's pretty cool. And he has his Bachelor of Science degree with UNO in emergency disaster management with a focus on GIS. So he's really helpful with the GIS stuff that I am really no good at all. Elijah, you want to say hi? I don't think you're muted.
Sure. Thank you for introducing me, Chuck. I think you covered everything. I think I've worked with some of you before, but it's nice to meet you all, if not. And I'll probably be working with you in the future. So thank you.
All right. So the first thing that I said in the title actually is, why should we even pass a new ordinance? Well, we're doing a lot of mapping projects throughout the state. And if you're getting new maps, then you have to adopt those new panels before they become effective. And typically that means amending the ordinance that you have. And if you amend the ordinance you have and we send it on to FEMA to show that, that you've adopted the right panels, but if you have an outdated ordinance, they might look at it and say, oh, this doesn't meet our minimum standards. You could be put on suspension or probation. So it's really just better to go ahead and when you're adopting these new panels, these new floodplain panels, that you go ahead and you pass a new ordinance. That way you're just ensured that everything that's required to be there is there and we get the panels just right. And there are a few of you that are on this call that are in that situation. Richardson and Nemaha counties right now. The rest of you, you'll get a letter saying that new panels will be coming out when that happens. And hopefully in the meantime, you're attending those public meetings about those panels and giving your input and the like. Another reason is that it makes your ordinance easier to use. What we found was the old ordinance just was a whole bunch of different rules, and we tried to rewrite it to make it read a little bit more like a standard operating procedure so that it flowed better, so that you could go to it as guidance to tell you how to work through a certain section, And so the new model ordinance is meant to be easier to use. And Elijah and I are working on making it even easier yet. So I think within the next year or two, we're going to have the new ordinance even modified a little bit more. The new ordinance, like I pointed out before, ensures that you meet FEMA's minimum standards and the state's minimum standards. So that's kind of the goal of the whole thing, is to make sure that that we meet all of that. We don't want there to be something that wasn't important 20 years ago and now, new legislation's been passed. Something's crucial, but it's not in your ordinance. So this will meet all of those criterias. And I talked to you earlier, it's easier than fixing your old ordinance. For some of you, it might be easier than finding your old ordinance. If you're like, I don't think we have one. Well, you have one if you're in the National Flood Insurance Program. You just might not have it on the shelf anymore. It may have been forgotten or something along that line. So rather than spending days trying to find it, let's just pass a new one and make sure that you're in good standing. Another thing too is, a lot of you folks call me. Chad, I get some calls from you every so often. Jane, I get a call from you now and again. And when you call me, if you're using the standard model ordinance, it's easier for me to point out where in your ordinance to look to find the answers to your questions. If you've got something else, something funky, something from 20 years ago, it's harder for me to tell you where to look to find the answers that you need. So so it helps, it really helps you to do your job better. It helps us to answer your questions better. Let's see. Okay, so those regulations, your model, this model ordinance, it follows everything that is in our state regulations and the federal regulations. And of course, federal regulations, we're talking about 44 CFR 60.3, the Code of Federal Regulations. And if you look that on over, it reads pretty close to what your ordinance already says. And of course, there's our state minimum standards. And if you read those, that reads very similar to your ordinance also. There might be little differences in language, and we're looking at making those tie in together better. But again, this is Administrative Code Title 455, Chapter 1, that says, you know, what the minimum standards are for your floodplain ordinance. So, Elijah, do you mind hopping in now and talking to them about the process?
Sure. Yeah, I can hop in now. So basically, when you have a community that wants to adopt a new ordinance, you start by discussing it with your board, whether it be for the county or the village or the city, and you want to come to an agreement on what you want to have in the ordinance. Now, normally by now, you would have reached out to DNR and received our model ordinance template. So you have the information that you need and the optional language that you have that you may want to adopt. And you'll talk this over with your board, and they'll let you know what type of optional language they want to adopt, or if they just want to keep it a plain and simple ordinance with the minimum standards of Nebraska. So once you've agreed on that, it's up to the floodplain administrator to complete a draft of the ordinance. This can be as rough as it needs to be, just as long as you have something to where you feel comfortable submitting it to DNR. And at this point, I will take that ordinance and I'll run it through our little checklist that we have. This checklist has all of the federal minimum standards as well as the state minimum standards. And I just run through the ordinance, I read it paragraph by paragraph, and I make sure everything is in there and that it checks all of our boxes. If anything is missing at this point, I send it back, I highlight the things that are missing, and I let you know what needs to be fixed. And then we just repeat the process until we get a passed review. At this point, once the ordinance passes our review, I'll go ahead and I'll bundle everything together with the checklist and I'll send it up to FEMA. And FEMA is the final entity in that process. They will go ahead and either approve it or deny it. I would say I've never had an ordinance be denied by FEMA by this point, because if it's passed our review, it's probably going to pass FEMA's review. Yeah. And so FEMA will go ahead and approve it. Usually their turnaround is going to be about 2 weeks after I submit it. So we try to get our end done within 2 weeks, and then they will get it within 2 weeks. So overall, you want to give yourself about a month of time, depending on when your deadlines are. And then once it's approved, then you can bring it back to your board. And at that point, the ordinance can be adopted. And we'll talk more about that adoption process later on. But generally speaking, that's how it would go about. You bring the ordinance back to your board, the board would adopt it, you stamp it with your community seal, and so on.
Thank you, Elijah. That's awesome. And that's exactly the process. And you know, I talked about how excited I was to have Elijah on. I'm even more excited to have Christy Abraham on. You know, a lot of times, many of you have asked, okay, so we want to adopt this. What do we need to do to adopt this? And I'm like, look, I can tell you all about floodplain regulations and about FEMA and who to call and stuff like that. But how to handle your village board and what's required, I really don't know. And so I'm so excited to have Christy Abraham on. She's the legal counsel for the League of Nebraska Municipalities. And so she's taking time. I know that many of you know that she's in the middle of a conference right now, and she's taking time away from that to come and speak to us today. And I so appreciate it. She has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology at the University of Nebraska. I should have asked you this before, Christy, but what is a JD?
Oh, that's my Juris Doctor. That's my law degree.
Nice. Juris Doctorate. I knew it had something to do with a law degree, but I was like, I don't really know what a JD is. So hot dog, yeah, with the University of Nebraska. So go Huskers. Excited about, I was excited about the baseball season, even though we didn't make it, but I thought they did a great job. Honored to work, she's honored to work with the League of Nebraska Municipalities since 2016. So she's been with them for a while, which is awesome. And she previously worked as legal counsel for the Nebraska legislature. And so without any further, Christine, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love that Chuck and Michelle had me create that slide, because then you got to see my greatest achievement, which is basically my daughter. So that's awesome. And that was us celebrating not her birthday, but my birthday at Disney World. So there you go. That's pretty much my life. So I'm so happy to be here. And I'm just going to really briefly go over how municipalities enact ordinances and resolutions. So next slide. Or am I supposed to be forwarding slides? I apologize if I am. Oh, there it magically went. Ordinances and resolutions are different, as I'm sure all of you on this call know. There's differences in what they are and how they're adopted. So a resolution creates policy, but ordinances are municipal law. So the ordinance takes a lot more effort to get passed, and so we'll go through that in the next few slides. Next slide. The first is the introduction of ordinances, and many of you out there may be chuckling about this slide, and I get it. This comes from our basic code of ordinances, and this outlines a pretty formal process about how you introduce your ordinances. So basically, your city council member or village board member at a meeting is going to say, I have an ordinance, or they're going to pass it to their clerk, and the clerk is going to propose the ordinance and file that copy. It's possible that your community has adopted different ways to introduce the ordinance, and that's totally fine. But I did want to mention that this is in the basic code of ordinances as to how you at least get your ordinance first introduced. Okay, next slide.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
You should fire me.
All good.
I got a thing saying you need to unmute yourself, and so I was over on the other screen again. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go.
It's all good. So the next slide is the procedure for resolutions, and happily, basically, the procedure to introduce a resolution is the exact same way as you introduce an ordinance. So same procedure for both. Next slide. Chuck and I and Elijah have talked about this a little bit. This is sort of a technical provision that's in state law that says what your style of ordinance needs to be. And basically what state law says is every ordinance has to begin with this magic language saying, be it ordained by the mayor and the city council of the city of blank, or the chairperson and board of trustees of the village of blank. I think what we discussed is this language may not actually be in the model ordinance, but it's no problem for your community to add it before you adopt it. Next slide. So this slide is about passing ordinances and resolution. And again, state law says to pass ordinances or resolution, it requires a majority of all members elected to your city council or village board. Okay, why is that important? The league actually gets a lot of questions about what that language means. The league interprets this language to mean it has to be a majority of your elected officials, not a majority of the quorum. That is something different. As you know, you can have a quorum if you have 5 members of your city council, for example. If you have 3 people there, you have a quorum. But to pass an ordinance, you need the majority of all members. So to pass an ordinance, if you're a 5-person council, again, in my example, you need 3 people to vote. Ordinances have to be read by title on 3 different days, unless that requirement is waived. And again, what I understand from now my dear friends, the Department of Natural Resources, you guys are going to want to suspend that requirement. You're going to want to get your model floodplain ordinance done sooner rather than later. So we recommend that you suspend the 3 reading requirement, and you do this by a 3/4 vote of your city council or village board. After you suspend that 3 reading rule, you can go ahead and read the ordinance by title and then move for final passage. Okay, next slide. The next thing you have to do is you have to publish your ordinance. And for most ordinances, they need to be published within 15 days after they're passed. And there are a couple of ways to do that. You can do that in a legal newspaper in or of general circulation, or you can publish it in book or pamphlet form. For smaller communities, I think a lot of those do publish in book or pamphlet form because it's generally less expensive than to put ordinances in the newspaper. So I did want to let you know that that option is out there. And if we go to the next slide, I wanted to also mention that a new law was passed this year. It's LB 159. And what it allows is for you to publish your ordinances in electronic form. You can see me putting that in quotes. When the league asked, what does that mean, publishing in an electronic form? The answer we got back was if you put it on your website. So if you are putting your ordinances that you just passed on your website, you have published your ordinances in electronic form. My only word of caution about this is the bill does not go into effect until August 28th. So if you're passing your ordinance before this time, you'll need to use the other more traditional ways, which is publishing in the newspaper or publishing it in pamphlet form. Okay, next slide. Great. The next couple of slides are just a reminder of the authority that your village board chairs and mayors have. In villages, basically your chairperson, their responsibility is to make sure the ordinance get printed, make sure they get published, and to carry out those ordinances. So that's your village board chair. Next slide, please. Mayors actually have a little bit more responsibility. Mayors can decide to veto or sign ordinances and resolutions. So if your mayor loves your floodplain ordinance, which I'm sure they will, she will sign it. If your mayor vetoes it, your city council gets another chance at that ordinance. They can come back by a 2/3 vote and overturn that veto. If your mayor, for some reason, just forgets to sign it or doesn't sign it for some reason, then it becomes effective without her signature after 7 days. So that's important to remember, that your mayor does need to go through the process of approving your floodplain ordinance. And I think this, oh, next slide. I think I'm getting close. Right, the effective dates. Most ordinances are going to go into effect 15 days after their passage. There are some provisions in state law about emergency ordinances, but I don't think your floodplain ordinance is an emergency. So just make sure if you do have some deadlines coming up that you remember that your ordinance doesn't go into effect until 15 days after you pass it. And then my final slide is for any of the county folks that might be on this webinar. As you'll notice, I work for the League of Nebraska Municipalities, so I know cities. But counties also have authority to enact ordinances. And so what you'll see on this slide is the references to state law that outlines the process for counties to enact ordinances. It's pretty similar to cities, but there are some differences. So I wanted to let you know that. And of course, as Michelle just put in the chat, the NACO, my counterpart over there for the counties, they are the folks you should contact if you have any questions. They're all brilliant and amazing. So they'll be able to help you with any county ordinance situation. So thank you so much for having me. Oh, and I have a poll question.
All right,
how many days?
Go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So how many days after the ordinance is passed does it need to be published? 10, 15, 20, or 25 days? And while we are all answering this poll question, I think this is a good time to break and open up for questions for Christy or for Elijah or for myself. And I know, Christy, I put quite a few questions in for you. So once it came to me, I know I nailed you before when we were practicing this, but one of my questions was when you say the potential of putting it on our website, if a village doesn't have a website per se, but they have a Facebook page, is that the same thing or to differentiate?
That is such a great question. That is such a great question. And if any of you know lawyers, you know when they start saying that, they don't know how to answer it, so they're stalling for time. But I think my answer would be this. The state law only says electronic format. So in my opinion, and again, you'll want to run this by your village or city attorney, I think Facebook is an electronic format. So I would argue, I would argue that Facebook, if you are putting them on your Facebook page saying these are our recently passed ordinances, that should do it. But again, please consult your local city or village attorney.
Let's see, I had another question. Michelle, you're muted, but I had another question. I can't remember what it was.
It pertained to the signature.
Oh, yeah, the signature line, that thing at the very beginning, you said your ordinance has to begin this way. Would it be allowable to put that instead at the end of the ordinance above the signature? Above the signature line? Or would it be at the very beginning?
That's a great question. And I'm just gonna try to go back and peruse the state law on that just to see what it says. You know, as I read the state law, it doesn't exactly say where it needs to be. It just says that language needs to be in it. So
Gotcha.
I think if you're having it by your signature line, I think that's just fine. As long as it's in there, I think you're good. Super.
So Chris Sedgwick, I'm sorry, Shuchet, he wanted to know, are counties required to pass their floodplain regulations by ordinance, or can it be by resolution? And I know that there's a difference between county and village. And again, this isn't my expertise. Christine, this isn't your area either, but do you know the answer to this question?
Again, do I start every answer with, this is a great question? It is a great question. And here is here is my concern. Unlike cities, which have very broad authority to enact ordinances, counties have a very limited authority when it comes to ordinances. In fact, the state law outlines specifically what you can enact by ordinance, and floodplains are not is not listed in that list. So I am guessing you're going to adopt it by resolution. But again, please be in contact with NACO or your county attorney to get confirmation on that. I'm just giving you my gut answer. My gut answer is it's going to be by resolution.
So I know that within this, and that's something we're going to be talking about in a moment, you know, it does say that violation of this ordinance is a misdemeanor. If it's passed as a resolution, can they still say that, Christine? I mean, with your differentiation between a resolution and an ordinance, ordinance holds more weight. Ordinance is more law, you know, for your.
Yeah. And ironically, I was legal counsel to the government committee when the bill passed that allowed counties to enact ordinances. It's a fairly recent evolution in counties. Counties have not had the authority to adopt ordinances for that long. Mostly before then, counties were doing everything by resolution. So I think that's a pretty typical way that counties do things like that. So I don't mean to keep passing the buck, but I'd really be in contact with NACO or county attorney just to get a firm answer on that.
Gotcha. Chris, I think I'm going to have to, I mean, for Pete's sakes, if the legal counsel for the legislature, you don't want to hear my answer because I wouldn't have the foggiest idea. I know that counties all have this ordinance, you know, well, not every county. There are some counties that aren't participating because they don't have maps, you know, Cherry County and some of those up north. But the counties that participate, they have this ordinance in their book. I know that Nemaha's in the process of doing it now too. So,
and that's great. And there may be additional state laws out there, Chuck, that I am not aware of that allows counties to pass these as ordinances. My slide was just sort of on the general process to pass a county ordinance. So there may be additional provisions to be aware of. So I appreciate your saying that.
And for all I know, the counties that pass this ordinance as a resolution, you know, so I don't know, you know, so she's absolutely right. This would be a good question for me and you to ask NACO about. I know I need to be educated in that. Sorry, I know that's not a very good answer. Do we have any other questions, Michelle? I wasn't monitoring the chat real well.
Nope,
I wasn't
I
reading the
think
slides
that
real well either.
if there are, somebody please jump in and send it again in case I missed it there. But I think that's all of them.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Christy, thank you so much, and thank you for taking time away from your conference to come and speak to us today. I so appreciate it. We're going to talk about the model ordinance, and before I pull it on up, I want to talk to you about the three different kinds of model ordinances that we have. There are three model ordinances. And we'll call them a B ordinance, a C ordinance, and a D ordinance. But essentially, this is what it means. If within your jurisdiction, within your village, even within your entire county, if all you have are non-engineered A zones, you know, just that blue blob, and that's all you have for floodplain, then you would adopt a B ordinance. And if you have a floodway, then you're going to adopt a D ordinance. Now, there are some communities, very few of them in the state, where they've got something better than a zone A, but they don't have floodway. They've got AE zones where a floodway wasn't designated. If that's you, if that's the upper level of what you've got on the map, then you can adopt a C ordinance, but there's very few of you out there. The thing about the D ordinance is the D ordinance covers everything dealing with the floodway, with AE zones and how to calculate elevations and the like, but also if you've got an AE zone, you probably also have some A zones. So it covers everything that's in that model ordinance for B, plus it has the extra stuff for floodways and for AE zones, for AH zones and for AO zones and the like. And so because of that, today, we're just going to pull up a D ordinance and talk to you about it, because if that's not what you need, if all you need is a B, we'll still be covering all of that stuff. We'll just cover a little bit of extra stuff besides. So that's how we're going to be handling that today. Deb Soley, good to see you on. I just saw your name pop up. I know you've probably been on here the whole time, but I just didn't see your name. Awesome. Good to have you, Deb. I hope you like Elijah's picture of Brownville there in the background. Make you feel at home. So here's what I was talking about. In the Code of Federal Regulations, they talk about floodplain management, and they say, this is the basics of floodplain management. You got to have a permit. You got to have, you got to be able to look over the development to make sure that's not going to be susceptible to flooding. You've got to build your stuff. If it's in an area of flooding, you've got to make sure that you build it out of materials that are resistant to flooding. You have to build it in such a way so that it'll withstand flooding, you know, and all of those basics. And you'll notice with everything that I just said, it doesn't matter whether you have a map or not. You know, you can go ahead and have all those stuff enacted. So even if you don't have a map, you could join the National Flood Insurance Program, and you would have to follow everything in 44 CFR 60.3 that's listed there in 60.3A. Well, if you do have a map and all it has is just these basic floodplains on it, well, then it says in 60.3B, do everything that's in A plus this other stuff. So that's why you would have a B ordinance. We call it a B ordinance because in the Code of Federal Regulations, all of those things are listed in 60.3B. Same thing with C. C would say everything that's in B plus these other things. Same thing in D, everything that's in C plus these other things dealing with floodway, you know. And of course there's an E also, but we don't have any coast in Nebraska. So so none of you are looking for an E ordinance dealing with your ocean beach property. All right, so with that, we're going to go on ahead and we're not going to keep this slide up. I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to pull up the ordinance and we're going to go right through it. But I did want you to know that we've got these slides. We're going to come back to them as a review afterwards. But if you ever need to just pull up the slides and use them as a reference, we do have slides talking about what we're going to be going over here shortly. Let me stop sharing for a moment.
We're going to pull up our state model ordinance, as we said, the D level ordinance that just includes everything that you may need, depending on even if you need a B, C, or a D ordinance. We'll just start at the highest level so we can work our way down, of course. So we're going to pull that up. These are also located on our website. I know Michelle has been posting the links to those in the chat, so check those out. Otherwise, you can find it on DNR's digital desk reference. We have all of our model ordinances located there that you can download and use as you need. Oh, here we go.
Sweet. Yeah.
All right.
And I know that I'm confident, Michelle, give me a thumbs up or something, that she gave you the links that are on our website. But many of you guys are going to be asking Elijah, can I get a Word version of that rather than the PDF? And Elijah has Word versions of that he can send you. So, so again, if you wanted to follow along, certainly pull up those links and you'll be able to get those. And you know, another thing you can do too, is you can just pull up the PDF and then save it as a Word file. And it'll be the same thing that Elijah's going to send you. So, so if you guys are tech savvy enough to go that route, then that's the way to go. And Elijah, let me get on down here and we'll get started then.
Yep, I'll take it away from here. So the sections I'm going to talk about are sections 1 through sections 3. These are basically just going to be the legal parameters for which the ordinance operates under. So we're not going to get into specific floodplain regulations right off the bat. this is mostly just going to be the legal parameters of the ordinance itself. By the way, those first 2 pages that Chuck scrolled through are not part of the ordinance itself. Those are just instructions on how to complete it. So when you go to our website and you open up our model ordinance, you'll see those first 2 pages there, but they're not, you don't have to include those in the ordinance. That's just for your information. So the actual ordinance starts on page 3 technically, and that's what we're looking at right now. So at the top, of course, it asks you to identify the ordinance or resolution number. That can be identified however you so choose. Most of the time, communities will just go with the year and then the ordinance number that of that year that they've passed. So, but it's however you need to identify it within your jurisdiction. So when you scroll down, we start off section 1.0 with the statutory authorization. Now this section, this paragraph is basically just stating that the state of Nebraska has delegated the responsibility of adopting zoning regulations to local governments. And then it asks you to specifically identify the governing body of that local government and the community's name. So this is where we get into the blanks that have to be filled in with this ordinance. So as you can see, we've got around parentheses or brackets, we've got governing body and community name. If you're using a Word document, you can actually do a find and replace. And by doing the find and replace, you would just type in that full phrase, the brackets, governing body, and the bracket, and it'll replace it with whatever you then type in. So you can say whatever the governing body is, the board of whatever community, the village board, city board, however you want to identify it, of the specific community names, you want to do the full name, so city of, village of, or blank county. And again, you can do a find and replace so that anytime the governing body or community name is mentioned, it'll automatically fill that in. And moving down, 1.2, findings of fact. This first paragraph from the flood losses resulting from periodic inundation just is acknowledging the risk of flooding that the community will experience or may experience that may risk loss of life, property, health, that kind of thing. And again, it asks you to identify the specific community name. And then the second paragraph is stating that the causes of flood losses can actually be caused by a cumulative effect of obstructions in the floodplain. 1.3 is the statement of purpose for the ordinance. This is just stating why the ordinance needs to be passed and what the reasons are for it. So it starts off by saying it's the purpose of the ordinance to promote public health, safety, and general welfare. Those are very important words to include in the ordinance itself. And it states it's going to do that by restricting or prohibiting uses that are dangerous to those items due to flooding, or it's going to require that the uses that are vulnerable to floods be provided with flood protection at the time of initial construction. And we'll get more into that later on. It also wants to reduce the financial burdens on the community from flood damage and assure that eligibility is maintained for property owners to have flood insurance through the flood insurance program. 1.4 is adherence to regulations. This just states that the regulations within the ordinance are in compliance with NFIP regulations as published in Title 44 of CFR and the Nebraska minimum standards. Okay, so 2.0 is general provisions, and it starts off with lands to which the ordinance applies. Now, this is a very, very important paragraph to focus your attention on because this paragraph asks you to identify the flood insurance rate maps that are included within your community's boundaries, whether it be a city, a village with an extraterritorial jurisdiction, or a county as well. It asks you to identify any of the firm panels that are within those boundaries. Now, these firm panels, we can identify those if you so choose. You can contact us and we can pull that list for you as well as their effective dates. Otherwise, you can always access these online via FEMA's Map Service Center. You just type in FEMA Map Service Center and it'll take you to it. and you can search by your community, and it will pull up that effective firm panel list. For counties will actually have upwards of 25 to 30 firm panels, and so we don't expect you to type in that full firm panel list with every single ID. FEMA actually does provide an index number that you can reference as well, which will include all of those firm panels together, and you just want to include the effective date of that index as well. But we encourage communities to list out the firm panels individually. So that's an important distinction to make there.
Right. And I'm going to probably bring this up again because it bears repeating. But I've been at this job for many years now. I don't know, 6 years, something like that. The only time I've ever known of a community in Nebraska to actually get put on suspension or probation was because of this. They missed a firm panel. And so it's very important. And another thing too is we can give you that list and we can pull it up off of FEMA's whatever. But if your jurisdiction changed and we weren't notified, the list we give you isn't going to be correct. So it really falls on you to look over your jurisdiction, to look over those panels, and to make sure that every panel that your jurisdiction touches or crosses is included. The one that got missed was one where they were a border county, I think between Jefferson and Gage, and they just dipped into Gage just a little bit, and they failed to adopt those two panels that were in Gage County that were in their jurisdiction. And now again, they were, I think, put on suspension for a month until their board got together and quickly adopted those other two panels. But again, this is a crucial paragraph. So, and again, we'll help you out. We'll give you the list that we have, but it falls down on, it's your responsibility to be able to look over your jurisdiction and make sure that we're right when we give those to you. Okay. All right.
Right.
Thanks, Elijah.
And that's a great point to make. Every once in a while, a community within Nebraska will adopt an extraterritorial jurisdiction or will change their boundaries without notifying us or making us aware of it. So that list that we would have wouldn't necessarily be up to date. So we could send you the list, and then it's up to you to find those others if needed. So, and just make sure that we have the right panels. So that's a great point. So section 2.2 is also a very important paragraph that we like to focus on because this allows the floodplain administrator to kind of have the final say in whether or not a location is within the boundaries of the zoning or of the floodplain map. And so if somebody comes to you and you've identified them in the floodplain and they say, well, it hasn't flooded here in 10 years. You have the floodplain administrator has the final say as to whether or not they're in the floodplain. And of course, this goes both ways, because if you decide to say they're not in the floodplain and they are impacted by flooding, the liability is placed on you because you said they weren't in the floodplain. So you have to use this. Effectively. And this paragraph also asks you to identify an appeals board. So where the interpretation gets contested, you want to have an appeals board to resolve the dispute. Whether that be a planning commission or if it just goes through the board, you still have to identify that. And again, you can just do a find and replace. Okay, so after you've identified the appeals board, it's going to go into 2.3, which is compliance, which basically states that any development within the floodplains of the community must be in full compliance with the ordinance. And other applicable regulations, of course. It adds that at the end. 2.4, abrogation and greater restrictions, basically just states that the ordinance shall prevail where it imposes greater restrictions than other regulatory documents within the community. And then 2.5, interpretation. The provisions of the ordinance shall be held to the minimum requirements and shall be construed in favor of the governing body. And then we've got 2.6. This is an important section because it states that while something may not be in the floodplain, flooding could still occur, and so you are not liable for that. The degree of flood protection required by the ordinance is set at minimum standards and is considered reasonable for regulatory purposes. And then it states that larger floods could occur due to man-made causes, ice jams, or debris, obstructions, that kind of thing. And the ordinance does not imply that those areas are not at risk of flooding. 2.7 is a severability section, so if any part of the ordinance is deemed to be unconstitutional or invalid, it doesn't affect the rest of the ordinance. Okay, and then much like the previous section 2.1, where it asks you to identify the flood insurance rate maps within your community, not every county is going to have one, but the counties that do have a flood insurance study, it's going to ask every community within that county and the county itself to identify that flood insurance study, as well as its effective date. And that can be found in the same place as the firm panels on FEMA's Map Service Center, or we can grant you access to that. If you contact us, we can get that information to you.
Yeah, and that's pretty straightforward. If you've got a FIS, the one we give you will be the right one. So there's not much variability there. It'll be for your entire county. And any county that's getting new maps will have a FIS. They're not going to go through all the work to come up with new maps for your county and not provide a flood insurance study for you, a FIS. So that's that. Very good. And again, as far as section 2.1, which is where you're going to put those panels in, and section 3.0, Elijah's really going to help you with that and make sure you get that wordage right and the like. And you can see everything else, even though we wanted to tell you what it was about, it kind of is what it is. Some of that stuff is there to cover your south side, to protect you from liability, which is awesome. But all of those things are just stuff that's required. And we're going to get into stuff now dealing with floodplain management and administration. You can see that in section 4. And as we go into this, everything that's in here, the grayed out stuff is the stuff that you're going to, do a find and replace, and you're going to type in something of your own. But pretty much everything that's there is stuff that has to be in there. So you can just go ahead and accept it as written. The thing is, we have some things that don't have to be in there, but they're optional. And that's kind of what I'm really going to focus on to get you guys out of here by 2:30, is I'm really going to focus on the optional language, stuff that you might want to have in your floodplain ordinance. You're not required to. So those things are going to be highlighted in blue. We're going to see them in just a moment. But I do want to just make the point that if you went through this ordinance, if you wanted to pass this ordinance, and you just took out everything that was highlighted in blue and filled in the gray shaded stuff and passed that, you would be in good standing with FEMA. The blue stuff that we're talking about now, it's totally up to you whether you put that in your ordinance or not. Do we have any questions yet, Michelle? I didn't see any pop up. Deb said hi. Hi, Deb. And it's great to be here, or great to have you here. So that's awesome. I didn't know about your relationship with Peru until recently. So that's exciting. Okay. So let's go ahead and continue on down. Section 4, floodplain management. So one thing that you have to do is you have to have a floodplain administrator. Someone has to be that person that's in charge. Now, some of your communities, the chair of your village board has gone on ahead and said, yeah, look, let it fall on my shoulders. Typically, many of you that are on this call are the village clerk, and you know how that works. They just pretty much dump whatever job title it is on top of the village clerk. But there are some communities where the village clerk works really well with the maintenance supervisor, and they give it to the maintenance supervisor. If your community has a zoning person, that's the perfect person to have in this position, because it really deals with giving out permits and making sure that they're zoned properly if they're in a flood zone or not. So if you've got a zoning administrator, that tends to work out really well also. And Chad, let me put in a plug for you. Some of you don't want any of you to do it, so you contract out. That's why Chad's on this call right now. Chad's the floodplain administrator for, I don't know, Chad can probably put it in the chat box for us, but I don't know, 26 communities or something like that. Most of them are very small communities, and they don't want to keep up on floodplain regulations. So they contract him and his company to be the floodplain administrator for them. So if they need that work done, they have Chad do it for them. So, but the point is, is you have to identify somebody, and that's what 4.1 is all about. Now you'll see here in blue, you could say, look, we're going to have a floodplain administrator, and dadgummit, we're going to have a floodplain administrator that's a certified floodplain manager. Means they've passed the certified floodplain manager test. They're keeping up. They're keeping up their training week after, or month after month, year after year, whatever. As we pointed out, Elijah passed his test this year. I think Chad might be a certified floodplain administrator. I'm one. So if you've got a lot of development going on, and if you've got a substantial floodplain in your community, you might say, look, we don't just want anybody doing this. We want to make sure in our community that it's a certified floodplain manager. Again, you see it's highlighted in blue. You don't have to have that. That's optional language. Okay. Permits are required for everything. A lot of people have said, hey, what am I supposed to do? They told me I'm the floodplain administrator. Well, right here in your ordinance, let's see, Chad says, as a firm, we are floodplain administrators for 10 communities in 1 county. Okay. So I knew there was a slew of them, had no idea how many. Duties of a floodplain administrator, and here's where they're written out. Reviewing the applications and writing out permits and everything. So I highly recommend that as you go through this, if that's your question, look, and Deb, I know that Brownville isn't a part of the NFIP yet, and more than likely they're going to dump that on your shoulders. So this might be a section you want to become familiar with. And I would also recommend, if that's you, that you attend one of my classes on basic floodplain administration, where I go over what the basic duties of your job are. Then it talks about going over the how they need to apply for a permit. So again, kind of written nicely, kind of like a standard operating procedure. Here's what needs to take place for them to get a permit, and it's right there in your ordinance. Optional. Let me explain this language here. Many of you know that if somebody elevates their property, or maybe their property is in the floodplain, but that floodplain's kind of, a mile wide, and they didn't notice when they were putting this map together that this one guy's individual lot is naturally on higher ground than everything else. And it turns out that his property is naturally higher than the floodwaters would be. He can apply for a letter of map amendment and take that out. And that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is if somebody wants to do that sort of artificially. They want to go ahead and they want to build in the floodplain, but they want to bring in fill and elevate their property so that their property is higher than the base flood elevation, and then get it removed. They can do that. They have to have a permit from you to bring the fill in, because that's development. But then once they do that, they can apply to FEMA and say, look, my property now is higher than the floodwaters. I'd like to have it removed. They can do that. But to get one of these, which we call a LOMAR-F, a letter of map revision based on fill, rather than a letter of map amendment, the LOMA that we talked about where it's natural grade. For them to do this, they have to get your signature. If you're the floodplain administrator, Deb, if you become the floodplain administrator, they have to come to you and get your signature before they apply for this. And what you're signing there has a whole lot of stuff. Like, did they get a permit to bring the fill in? Did they get all the other permits that they were supposed to have? Did they fill in a wetland? Did they take the habitat of some endangered species when they did this? There's all of those things. But one clause that's in there, it says, you're signing there saying, as a local authority here, if they build on this fill, yeah, it'll be reasonably safe from flooding. Well, how do you know that? Chad might know that, because he works for an engineering company. But the rest of us, we're clueless. We don't know whether it's going to be reasonably safe from flooding. What does that mean? And you're putting your signature there. The concern is that if you go ahead and you sign this, and then they build on this property. And the reason they're getting it removed from the floodplain is so they don't have to buy flood insurance. So they don't get it. And a flood comes through. Maybe it's a regular flood. Maybe it's a flood that's worse than normal, but it washes away all that fill. The house collapses. And now they're in your office shouting in your face saying, look, I just lost a $1.5 million house that I built on this fill, and it was uninsured. You signed this thing saying that if I built on this fill, it would be reasonably safe from flooding. I've lost everything and it was uninsured. What's your community going to do to help me recoup my losses? Well, what they do in Blair, or what they did in Blair, Nebraska, was when they came on in to get that signature, before he signed, he gave them a technical bulletin from FEMA. And that technical bulletin is literally called How to Build Reasonably Safe from Flooding. And he said, as he handed them that, he said, I'm going to sign this, but if you ever build on that fill, you have to follow this technical bulletin. And it's technical bulletin number 10. You'll see it listed here. So that if that happened and they came on in and said, we lost everything, what are you going to do? They would say, well, look, did you follow the technical bulletin we told you to? And if they said, well, we followed most of it, then they'd say, well, that's not our problem. We told you to follow all of it and you didn't. Or they could say, yeah, we followed it to the letter and we still lost everything. In which case, in Blair, they would say, well, look, you have your attorney talk to our community attorney. We'll back you 100%. As you go after FEMA and you say you followed their technical bulletin and you still lost everything, when you go after them to recoup your losses, we'll support you. Either way, they have taken the liability off of the community by saying you have to follow this if you're building. And what this does is it puts it right into your ordinance. Now, I don't know that Blair had this in their ordinance. They just did this as a practice. But if you talk to your legal counsel, this is, I think, a good thing to have in there, because I think that it gives a little bit more weight to that. It shows that, not only did you give it to them, but it's written right there in the community's ordinance, in your laws, that they have to follow technical bulletin number 10 if they build on fill that's been removed by a LOMAR F. So that's what that states. And again, it's optional, but I recommend you have it in there. I think that it gives you some protection, from liability. Okay, flood data required. It talks about the requirement. And again, there's nothing here in blue, so this is just stuff that's supposed to be in there. Variances, if somebody wants to build and for some reason or other they qualify for a variance. In other words, they can't really build what they need to build and follow your floodplain ordinance. It can't be done. It would provide a hardship. A good example of that would be a boathouse. A boathouse pretty much has to be built down there at water's edge. You can't build it, 30 feet up the bank, or you can't elevate it 10 foot up in the air. It's got to be down there, So because of what it is, it has to be built there and it has to be kind of built at ground level. So that's a good example. But if somebody wants to appeal this and say, we want a variance from your ordinance, this sets up how that appeals board is who that appeals board is going to be and how they're going to manage that appeal. Again, you can see none of it's in blue, so it pretty much has to be written as is. Here we're talking about the conditions for a variance, the conditions that have to be met if you're granting a variance. Another good section for you to become very familiar with. And enforcement. So the agreement here is FEMA is going to provide flood insurance for anybody in your community, whether they're in a floodplain or not. And your part of that agreement is you adopted an ordinance and you promised to enforce it. So here's the section about enforcing violations, notices that you need to give them, and this section on penalties. So here you're going to come up with a fine amount. Now, pretty much I've seen a lot of amounts in there from $100 to $500. I just found out recently in Nebraska, $500 is the cap. And that's kind of a number that I really sort of recommend. You'll notice $500 isn't much of a fine, but you'll notice here, if you read this, that's $500 each day that the violation continues. So that compounds day after day after day. And it doesn't take too much time before $500 turns out to be big money. I don't really expect anybody's ever going to levy that fine on anybody, but it's a good way to get them to show up in your office to know that you have that authority. This fine is for a misdemeanor. If they violate this ordinance, that's a misdemeanor. And of course, a misdemeanor is a crime, so you can't just slap the fine on them. It would have to go to court. Court would slap the fine, but still. I wanted to point out that it can't be more than $500. General provisions, encroachments, and the like. And here we're talking about the floodway district. So again, if you don't have floodway in your area, then this doesn't really apply. But this talks about how you can build in the floodplain. And it is possible to build in the floodplain. You can't build a residential structure in the floodway. I'm sorry, I say floodplain. You can't build a residential structure in the floodway. But if someone has a residential structure, they are allowed to build additions onto it. They are allowed to do work on it. You can put other structures in the floodway. You can have a shed there. You can put a slab for an RV in the floodway. If you allow it, you can have all those things. But optional language is, you might say, look, I don't want anything in the floodway. The floodway is this area that's really dangerous. I don't want anything built there. And you could go on ahead and pass that rule. Now, there are a few things that are like this. Floodway, increasing the elevation beyond the 1 foot above freeboard, and some other things that are like that. I want to talk to you about, if you're using those kind of optional languages, you need to work closely with Elijah, because it's great to say, hey, we're just going to say nothing, and then we're going to say nothing built in the floodway, and then we're just going to get rid of everything else in section C. That probably won't work, because several things in section C talk about how structures that are already there can build, and you probably need to have some of that left in. So you'll need to work with Elijah if you decide to use this optional language. You can't just get rid of everything else that's in C if there are already structures in your floodway. You might have to keep some of those provisions in your ordinance. So work closely with him if you decide to do that. And here we're talking about the rules for residential and non-residential structures. Residential structures have to be built 1 foot higher than the flood waters, that base flood elevation that Yair is talking about quite a bit. You can increase that if you want to. You can make that 1.5 feet. You can make that 2 foot. You can make that 3 foot if you want to. And here's where you would put those things in. One of the things that I would caution you is to go on ahead and do kind of a find and replace with this also. If you choose 2 feet here, make sure that throughout the document, you're looking for all of those, that optional language for an increase, and make sure that you do it across the board. You don't want to say residential structures have to be elevated 2 feet above base flood elevation and then miss it when we're talking about mobile homes, So make sure that if you do decide to go with a higher standard here, that you do that universally throughout the document. So residential structures have to be built higher, a foot higher than the base flood elevation. You can make that even higher than that if you want to. Non-residential structures, they can either be elevated or they can be dry flood proofed to that same elevation. So again, if you choose to elevate structures 1.5 feet, make sure that you're saying dry flood proof to 1.5 feet also. A dry flood proof means that if there's a flood, that this structure is built strong enough to withstand the hydrostatic pressure of that flood water on the outside, and the hydrodynamic, the forces of the flood water that are coming, and also that it's sealed tight so that no more than 4 inches of water can get in during a 24-hour period. They would need to have a flood proofing certificate in order to do dry flood proofing. You can also have an area below lowest floor. Essentially what they're talking about here, this is talking about substantial improvements in the AO zone. Construction substantial improvements shall have the lowest floor. So again, if they're doing a substantial improvement, that's going to have to be elevated also. So you use that same amount. And then critical facilities. So this floodplain ordinance here doesn't talk about the shaded X zone. If it's in the X zone, it's not in the floodplain. But you can put in words like this to say, look, we're also going to regulate that shaded X zone and say that if it's a critical facility, a fire station, police station, rest home, hospital, clinic, something like that, we don't want that to be in that shaded X zone. Remember, the shaded X zone is for something dealing with maybe a 0.2% or a 1 out of 500 chance of flooding. The point is that you want to, is that if the flood is worse than a 100-year flood, then you don't want your fire station in there because you don't want your rescuers to be the ones needing rescued. So you might want to have something in here saying critical facilities. We want them left out of the 500-year floodplain also. So so it's good language to have. Space below lowest floor, that's what I started talking about earlier. Space below lowest floor is if you're building your house above a garage or something like that, and you can do that, and then the lowest floor of your actual living space counts as that elevation above base flood elevation for regulatory purposes. And I think to an extent for insurance also, which would be awesome. But that area down below, essentially the garage, can only be used for certain things. It can only be used for storage of vehicles, for stairways going up to your upper living space, and for parking your cars, and the like. And it has to be vented. So the idea is that if there is a flood, your house stays high and dry, your living quarters do, but the garage that's underneath your house gets full of muck and mud and stuff like that. You've already driven your cars out. You've gotten the boxes of storage material, whatever, out of there. And what happens is after the flood waters go back out, you go in there with a scoop shovel and a hose, you spray off the concrete, and you're back in business. Let's see. Yeah, Michelle, I'll let you take care of Shay. And you're back in business. Now you can go ahead and limit the size of that if you want to. This 299, that's what they're limited to if you're building it along the beach, along the ocean. So that's how that language got in there. And then a lot of people are asking about appurtenant structures. You're not required to have anything. You're required to talk about residential structures and non-residential structures, and that's it. Now, if that's the case, and if that's where you leave it, if somebody wants to put a little garden shed out behind their house, that would be a non-residential structure, and it either has to be elevated or dry flood proofed, and those are your only options. What this gives you is an option for a third thing. If it's a small structure, and a pertinent structure or accessory structure might be another way of thinking about it. So you've got a primary structure on your property, and this is appurtenant to that. If it's a small appurtenant structure, then you can go ahead and you can build that. You can build it at grade, but it has to be vented, like we were talking about with building your house above a garage. And so if you want to allow that, you can put this optional language in to allow accessory structures. One of the things I want to point out here is that we have a size, there needs to be a size limit. And what we have is a size limit of 400 square feet. I'm trying to think of find where that is on here. Whoops, gone too far. Oh, here we go. The floor area shall not exceed 400 square feet. That got put in there a few years ago, 3 years ago, when we hadn't been given much guidance with FEMA. FEMA has come out with guidance now, and they say an appurtenant structure can't be larger than a standard 2-car garage. Well, your typical 2-car garage is 24 by 30. That's about 720 square feet. So I think you could get by with putting in 750, maybe even 800 square feet there. I think you'd have a hard time with FEMA approving it if you went anything, certainly anything above 1,000 feet. I don't think they would accept as being an accessory structure. They would consider that to be a non-residential structure, a larger structure, maybe even an ag structure. But So I think that you're safe with anything 750 feet or less, maybe even 800 square feet. Manufactured homes, this is one where we really get into some trouble, because people do say, look, we don't want any manufactured homes in our, we don't want, we're talking mobile homes here. We don't want mobile homes in our floodplain. So we're just going to forbid them. That's okay. That's great. I live in Malcolm where mobile homes are forbidden anyway. So they want this provision in here. And with Malcolm, they can go ahead and put that F, they can put in within the floodplain, manufactured homes shall be prohibited, and they're good to go. They can get rid of everything else. Most of you can't do that because even though you might want to prohibit new manufactured homes, you probably have some manufactured homes that are already there. In Malcolm, they haven't allowed them for years, so there are none in the floodplain here. But if you have some in there, you're going to have to keep some of this stuff down here to manage the mobile home parks that you already have, or some of the mobile homes that might already be there. So again, we've kind of talked about that before. I've got 5 minutes to bring this home. Fill in section 5.3. This is where we talked about, raising your home on fill. Some people might just say, look, we just think that's a bad idea, so we just want to forbid that. And again, you can do that. This is where you would put that in. Make sure and work with Elijah closely on that to make sure that if there's any of this stuff that needs to remain in there, that it remains in there. Another optional language is new and replacement septic system in the floodplains are prohibited. I kind of recommend that one, but I don't know your community. It might be a community, it might be that in your ETJ that there's just no way to prohibit septic system in your floodplain, because the floodplains can be so wide. There are houses that are there and there's just no other place to put the septic system but in the floodplain. Okay. Recreational vehicles. I kind of think that RV parks are kind of a nice thing to have in the floodplain because it, quite frankly, keeps people from building houses there, from building cabins and the like. So, they can pour a slab and make some RV things. And if floodwaters come along, they can hitch up that RV and get it out of there. But that hasn't been the case. In the last floods that we've had, RV parks have been hit hard and they haven't gotten their RVs out of there. And those RVs can float down river, knock out bridges, and do a lot of damage. It's also possible that grandma and grandpa's RV can be there and they took their hearing aids out for the night and they didn't know that floodwaters were coming, and now you have to, now you're finding yourself in court explaining to the judge and to the prosecuting attorney why it is that you allowed there to be camping in an area that you knew was highly susceptible to flooding, So it's totally your call on that. So let me see. That looks like it's just the same thing written twice. Here's something that we don't have on here, but it's optional language that I highly recommend. And that's after the section A, be on the site fewer than 100 consecutive days. I would put the word "and" right after that. Because the way it reads now, be on site for fewer than 180 days, comma, or semicolon, be fully licensed, ready for highway use, etc., or. And that kind of makes it seem like it can be either A or B or C. And I think that just for your well-being, I would say, don't let it be on for more than 180 days. And if it's going to be there, we want it to be ready for highway use, and we want the tires to be inflated, and we want it to be ready to go. So I recommend you put the word "and" in there to make it very clear that it can be A and B or C. It's not required. Let me bring it on home. I've got 2 minutes. 2% annual chance flood. I'm sorry. That kind of brings us to the end. So I did bring it home. One of the things that I want to talk about, though, is definitions. If you passed any of these optional languages, make sure you go through the definitions and also adopt the definitions for those for that optional language that you passed. And then when we get down to the very bottom, again, you're going to get this all approved. Then Then Elijah's going to go ahead and put it through to FEMA and have them approve it and then get it back to you so you can get it passed. And once you pass it, then here it says adopted and approved by the governing body of such and such this day, month. This is where, if you're one of those communities that Christy just talked about, this is where I would recommend you put that line about the ordinance that's required. I recommend you put it down here rather than up at the top of this document. I think it'll flow in really, really well here. I don't have that language up in front of me anymore, but I think it would work out well here. It gets put in here and then adopted and approved by, there's a signature, and bam, you're golden. All right, so this brings us, one other thing I want to talk about before I open it up for questions. You can go on ahead with substantial damage and substantial improvement with going with cumulative loss, or you can even say less than 50%. For you guys who know what I'm talking about, if a structure is damaged more than 50%, or if it's improved more than 50%, we consider that to be, the state of Nebraska and your ordinance considers that to be a total rebuild. And so if it's a house that's already there, and so it doesn't really fit your ordinance and your requirements, if they're going to do more than 50% worth of work, they have to bring the whole structure into compliance. You can set that less than 50%. You can set it for 30. You can also say cumulative. So over the last 10 years, they can't do more than 50% repair on it, or 5 years, or whatever you choose to put in. And that's where you would put it in, is here in the definitions. With that, I'm going to stop screen share. And then I'm going to go ahead and start screen share again, but this time go with our PowerPoint. Here's our contact information. If you need to get a hold of me, you can go on ahead and call me or email me, either one. There's Elijah's information. Adele Phillips, if you've got questions about mitigation, she's outstanding. Katie Ringland is our boss, all of our bosses, and she is the floodplain coordinator for the NFIP coordinator for the state. Also, there's Christy Abraham's information if you wanted to contact her. Okay. And there we are, questions. Absolutely. And Sherry, absolutely. There are counties, we're working with 2 counties right now that are adopting the new resolution, maybe even more than that. Elijah, are there more than just Nemaha and Richardson that are adopting the new ordinance? Other counties?
I can't. Okay. There's quite a few communities that I'm working with. I can't tell you which ones have decided. I can't tell you which ones have decided which languages they want to adopt and which ones they don't. You know, so. But there are quite a few communities that want to adopt the updated accessory structure language. That's kind of the popular one. And so if you have any questions about that, let me know. We're still kind of in the developing process of that new language, but we'll have a good draft shortly here that every community can adopt. So
yeah.
We'll keep
and the one we have is accepted by FEMA. So so if you just want to use the language that's there, that's good. FEMA came out with new guidelines for accessory and ag structures. And so we're really working on trying to get that kind of in blue in the ordinance. But the language they have doesn't easily fit into our ordinance. So we're really having to screw things around a little bit. I want to thank you all for being here, and I will stick around and answer any more questions, but I don't want to keep you guys. I've already kept you 5 minutes over. I told you we would be struggling to get it in within time. But thank you so much for being here, and please get a hold of us if you're wanting to adopt a new ordinance. Again, thank you for your time.